My name is Emma Dreyfus, and I am the Manager of Community Programs here at the Phillips Collection. Thank you for joining us for this conversation about the healing art of Black doll making. During this talk, our panelists, Sherri Lumpkin and Yolanda Hester, will dive into the history of Black dolls and talk about Sherri's approach to her Your Inner Doll workshops, which she will be hosting at the Phillips Collection beginning in April. The Phillips Collection is proud to present this workshop series in partnership with Gateway Media Arts Lab, home to over 20 enterprises with a passion for design and innovation. Collectively, their services include digital media services, film and video production, graphic and web design, content creation, and more. A project of Gateway Community Development Corporation, the lab serves as a creative industries hub designed not only to support emerging enterprises, but to fuel community and economic development. I have the honor of introducing our panelists tonight, and I will also be facilitating the Q&A at the end of our discussion. As you listen to the talk this evening, please enter any questions you have into the chat, and I will introduce them at the end of the program. Sherri Roberts Lumpkin is the founder and executive director of Ragbaby Exchange. She became a doll maker in 1987 after designing a black angel to top her mother's Christmas tree. To Sherri's surprise, once it was seen by others, she received many orders for this angel that looked like most of her friends, family, and colleagues. While working as a docent at the Anacostia Community Museum in Washington, D.C., Sherri was asked to teach a doll making workshop for school children. Through the workshop, she noticed children felt the same lack of validation that she experienced as a child. Sherri began reinforcing how beautiful they were and persuading them to make dolls that looked like them. To the children's surprise, they fell in love with what they created. Sherri's goal with the Ragbaby Exchange workshops is to bring out the inner beauty in everyone so they will learn to appreciate their outer beauty. In addition, Sherri is an artist in residence at Prince George's County Schools and teaches crafts to seniors at Prince George's Parks and Planning. Yolanda Hester is a cultural historian who has worked on a number of projects for UCLA, Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, KCET's show Lost LA. One project in particular focuses on the history of the Shindana Toy Company and Black doll history. She is also the program manager of DEAI at the Phillips Collection. Sherri and Yolanda, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who's come to listen to our talk. I want to start by saying that although we think of dolls in the context of children and childhood, and particularly girls, this is not necessarily a conversation about childhood, but a conversation about humanity and the type of art making and craftsmanship that people embrace for survival, solace, and health, especially in times of crisis. So I want to start with finding out a little bit about you, Sherri. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into doll making?
Great, thank you so much. So like she said in my bio, my mom and I were looking for a doll to top her Christmas tree, and we thought to ourselves, wow, we don't come in angels. And so I made her one. And that was like in the 80s. And that was really fun to create that for her and get orders. But even as a child, I used to make my doll clothes and played with dolls kind of a long time. I say until I was about 13 or 14, I played with dolls. And so I really liked them. I really liked how they are nurturing and those kinds of things. And so then as I continue to just create them for maybe a niece that was born, and lots of people would say, you should make these dolls, you know? And so at the Anacostia, I got the opportunity to give a doll workshop, and seeing how it changed the kids that I taught, I thought this could be a way to really learn how to create something that will bring self-love and self-worth to people. And so I started studying about self-love and self-esteem.
And can you tell me a little bit, I know that you studied art as well, is that correct?
Yes. I was a fashion design major at Hampton Institute. I mean, well, now it's Hampton University. Yes. So I changed my major to art. And because the fashion design there was not doing it for me, I made all of my clothes a lot of times when I was young, and my mom made my clothes as well. So I got kind of tired of sewing, but I really wanted to illustrate. And so I changed over to art. And so that became what I was doing. But when in my career, I became a graphic designer. So I just hit a lot of different aspects of design in my career.
I see. And you apply these to your art making, some of the tools and techniques.
Yes, it's amazing how all the things that you've learned and all the inspirations that you have all come together full circle in creating a doll, because a doll has on fashion. A doll can be a piece of art. It can be abstract. It can be assemblage. It can be a collage. It can be all of those things.
And you also mentioned that you researched self-esteem. Can you talk a little bit about that and how one goes about that?
Yeah, so when I went to college, I instantly became like extremely shy. It was like I had no confidence in myself. And I really do think that that held me back. I think it really, it's like I couldn't even talk to people because I was embarrassed. Like if my grades weren't great, I'd be embarrassed. If I didn't draw something the way I thought it should look, I was embarrassed. Or if I didn't look like I thought I should look, I was embarrassed. And so when I saw these kids having these same issues, I thought to myself, what could really make this help them do more than just giggle one time, but really understand what it is to have self-esteem and self-worth. And so I just started looking at websites. I went to the library. I studied a lot of different things. I found that self-esteem doesn't come from someone just saying you're beautiful. Self-esteem comes from inner work. And so I started to try to do the inner work myself. I remember making myself go to a party by myself and making myself talk to people and feeling extremely embarrassed and awkward the whole time, and just kept doing it over and over until it becomes second nature. And so now I'm a social butterfly because I can just, bring up a conversation. And I will still say that there are times when I'm still embarrassed and still feeling awkward, but I just move through it because now I know that I have to do those things in order to get out of the space that I'm in my head that a lot of people aren't seeing, but you're thinking.
Can you talk a little bit about this connection between Black dolls and self-esteem?
So I think that dolls are so um, just nurturing and rewarding and way deeper than just making a doll, right? Because when you create art, all art is therapy. Like when you're doing something with your hands, it can be therapeutic. Even washing the dishes, if you like it, can be therapeutic. And so creating something that is in your own image and filling it with love and taking the time, picking the fabrics, all of that helps you to build an idea of who you really are. And for me in my workshop, I also have specific steps towards creating your doll from your soul outward so that you can add affirmations and self-love within it.
And speaking of self-esteem, you mentioned that you were inspired by the doll tests done by Dr. Mammy and Kenneth Clark, and it was done in the 40s. And the purpose of the test was to sort of measure the effects of segregation and racism on Black children. And the results would later be used in the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case. Can you talk a little bit about that test as inspiration and how it influences your work?
So that test was something that I remembered when I first saw the kids doing the workshop. And I really, colorism is big within the Black community and Brown communities. And it's also a lot of racism that is in the media and how we are affected by these things. And the same with Brown v. Board using that test. That's what they were talking about, is how Black children, brown children feel about themselves because of what other people are have limiting ideas about them, right? And so I thought, if I could redo this test, I could find out how people think about themselves before the workshop, then do the workshop, and then after the workshop, it would be like, this is great. We learned that we are beautiful and we're worthy. But it didn't work out that way, because I feel like a lot of people already know what to expect when you give a pre-test or a post-test. They already know, I should answer this way, right? And so then they'll answer it, and then they'll do the workshop. And during the workshop, I can see that those answers weren't really what they felt. They just chose them because they thought they were right. And so after the workshop, I feel like they may have learned more, but it doesn't show in my scientific test. It did not show that. But during my research, I found that several people recreated that test. There was a psychologist, Dr. team, Derek and Darlene Hopkins, and I think that was in the 80s, where they redid that test and got the same exact results as the test that Mamie and her husband did in the 40s. And then in 2006, I believe it was Kerry Washington. She was a 16-year-old who did this for her high school project. She got the exact same test. She has a film that you can see. The same answers, the same feelings of not thinking that Black dolls were pretty, or Black people were mean, and white people were sweet or pretty, right? And so then Soledad O'Brien did the same test again in a CNN study, and it was exactly the same. And I think that was in like maybe 2010 or so. And so with that, I found that through all of those years, it was the same kinds of answers, even though we had a time in the 60s where, Black power, people were beautiful, Black is beautiful, all of that, we still had these issues. What I'm finding now is that more and more people are beginning to understand and see that they are naturally beautiful and worthy. It doesn't stop them from sometimes picking a doll complexion that's totally different from theirs, but I do see more people than I used to see choose what's closer to them.
So for people who are unfamiliar with the doll tests, Mamie and Kenneth Clark did a number of experiments to test the effect of racism and segregation on children. But one of the experiments was to ask children for their preference between two identical dolls. One was white and one was Black. And what the results showed is that Black children overwhelmingly chose the white doll over the Black doll. They thought the white doll was more positive and represented more positive characteristics than the Black doll. You mentioned, you had said something about you could identify in your workshops that the person who had taken that pre-test wasn't being quite honest or honest with themselves. Can you talk a little bit about how you were identifying this in the workshops?
Well, so I have like several colors of dolls. Like they could be from about 6 or 7, from the darkest to the lightest, which would be white.
Skin colors, right?
Skin colors. And
Yeah.
it's fabric, so it's not exactly like skin colors, but it represents skin colors. And so one of the ways that I could tell is if I had 20 kids and 25 dolls, and at the end, it was one person left to pick the doll, and that person was darker, my complexion or darker, and there was dark brown dolls and a white doll. They almost always pick the white doll. And I would say, let them pick it. And then I would bring up a conversation about skin color and why do some people choose different skin colors? And then I would get the answers like, oh, well, that brown is ugly. And I would say, well, why do you think that color brown is ugly? And they would say things like, well, in school, they tell me that, you're Black and ugly like an African. And I would question, what does that mean? What does it mean that you're Black and ugly like an African? All Africans aren't ugly. I mean, what does that mean? And so I would come to find out. that their ideas of what's beautiful and what's pretty is coming from the media and film, and how Africa is shown in most films at one point was just always a negative or an uncivilized society, or a society that needs a white person to make it a more human society, right? And so also there were limiting images of us in the media and in commercials. And so once I would have a conversation with them and talk to them about how, Africa is a whole lot of countries with a whole lot of different cultures, and lots of kings and queens, lots of civilizations that have been built, and show them pictures sometimes of beautiful people from the Africas, they would often feel like, oh my God, I didn't know. Because I often said, how is that a negative connotation when somebody says, oh, you look like an African? And so they began to learn that that was not a negative thing.
So speaking of the continent of Africa, Black doll making throughout the Americas, from the top of Canada to all the way to the bottom of South America, there's many different traditions of Black doll making, and without a doubt, those traditions are tethered back to doll making that happens in West and Central Africa. Can you talk a little bit about that connection and the transference of those skills across the waters to the Americas?
Yeah, so I was not really aware of Africans and doll making, even though I knew that they did sculpture and all of that. But in research, I found that they used dolls for spiritual reasons and rites of passages and all kinds of things. But one doll in particular that I learned about was a doll that was used in the transatlantic slave trade, and it's called the Abayomi doll. And the Abayomi doll has a meaning of precious and resistance, right? And it was a doll that parents would tear their clothing, or women would tear their clothing, maybe men, I'm not sure, and they would create this doll with a series of knots. And as they created this doll with a series of knots, they would say a prayer, and they would create it into a little doll, and they would give it to their kid, or they will hold it in memory of their kid. And so it was like a healing doll that they used to help them through this awful thing of being stolen or their kids being taken away from them. And I thought that was a real great way to segue into the Americas, because you had doll making here, and now in the Americas you also have doll making, and some of those traditions are put into the dolls that we make now. Also, voodoo dolls they were not traditionally dolls that are used for revenge, right? They are used in a spiritual way to help heal people and to speak to ancestors.
Great, thank you. I think we actually have an image of an Abayomi doll. Let me pull that up. And can you tell us a little bit about this particular doll? Or
this particular one is the doll that was used with knots. There are about 8 knots that people use to make them. So they're using strips of fabric that they've torn from fabric, and they make a knot at the head to make the head, and then they make a knot at the waist. Then they dress it. Then they make knots on the edges for hands and knots on the ends for feet. And so then they just tie, pretty little head dresses and different fabrics around them. They don't use any thread and any glue.
that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of, I just want to talk a little bit about the word doll, because in the context of African dolls, which include many different functions and forms, doll is a very problematic word, because, what we understand to be a doll predated the term doll, which came about in like the 1500s, 1600s. But people have been finding organic materials and making something in their likeness for a very, very long time, hundreds of years before that time period. Can you talk a little bit about the word doll and its application to the work that you do? Since your work also, your dolls actually serve a variety of different purposes and functions.
Yes. So I find that the word doll can be limiting, particularly for boys and men. I found that a lot of parents would not allow their sons to make dolls because they thought it was feminine, even though a lot of the sons wanted to make them because they could care less, you know. And oftentimes when boys make dolls, they are making it in their image in action figures or whatever they feel that it represents them. So I had to really work on a way to approach it so that I can allow more, you know, boys to be able to create images. And so I just I created a workshop called Raising a Superhero. And that way I was able, because boys and girls can make those. Even, you know, it's just that the word doll seems so limiting because everyone thinks it's a toy. And every time I do a workshop, they think that it's only for little girls. And my workshops are not necessarily for little girls because it's deeper than they are able to go at this time in their lives, right? So I usually start at the age 8 and up. And some things may be too deep for 8-year-olds.
And I know, gender is a big consideration in
Yeah.
terms of doll making in particular. And in your workshops, do you find that both boys and men also attend your workshops?
So I don't have a lot of men that attend workshops. I've only had a few men make dolls with their daughters, right? But I've had lots of boys because I do a workshop as an artist in residence with the Prince George's County Schools. And I have my Raising a Superhero workshop is very popular there for learning how to be your own superhero. I find that it's um, when men do create a doll, they are free. They just seem so free. Whereas I find women, when they're creating it, they want it to be perfect. They want it to be pretty. They want the hair to be right. They want everything to match. And I'm often saying, just pick that, just go for it. And just put that with that, because that'll be beautiful.
Mhm.
So did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I want to
Okay.
talk a little bit about some of the pieces in the Phillips collection that you say resonate with the work that you do and really speak to some of the African American art making traditions. And this is one piece in particular, this house, it's a quilt, housetop by Melissa Petway. Can you speak a
Mhm.
little bit about some of the similar materials and techniques and traditions that are a part of quilt making that also overlap with doll making?
So I think this is so great because, you know, Melissa Petway, her last name is Petway, and she lived in Gee's Bend in Alabama and on the Petway plantation. And so she is a descendant of enslaved people on that plantation. And, you know, back in those days when women, well, whoever was making quilts, particularly Black people, they were making quilts with codes and information for the Underground Railroad a lot of times. You know, they would hang a certain quilt to let you know to go north or don't come here, or somebody's here, you can't come. And then also they were using the fabrics that they had, right? They were using wool, you know, sometimes feed packs, remnants, clothes to make these different patterns. And it, to me, that it's like you were creating something from the little that you had and you created something beautiful. Hence the name of the Ragbaby Exchange, because I often thought, you know, Ragbaby is like rags to riches, right? It's coming from nothing to what's beautiful.
You know, I want to fast forward to one of the other pieces in our collection that also resonates with your work, because collage is also a part of doll making. So let me skip forward. And can you talk a little bit about this piece and techniques used and your work as well?
Yes, I love this piece by Janet Taylor Pickett because it is a collage, and it's called And She Was Born. But in a statement she said, she's saying she was born out of Blackness and defined by whiteness, or the white line. She didn't say whiteness, but the white line. And I thought that was just an amazing thought that she had when she created this. In addition to that, she's using fabric and painting and other pieces to make this a collage, sort of like an assemblage. And in my doll making, oftentimes we are, because this is really a piece of art that's being created from your soul, right? So we are really using glue and strips of fabric and pieces, and we are basically taking pieces to make a collage or assemblage of who we are. So we're assembling, ourselves. We're putting out our pieces together to create who we are.
And with that in mind, let's look at some of your work.
Okay. So this is a doll that I created for Ruth Carter, who really, really inspires me. Ruth Carter also went to Hampton for her undergraduate degree, and she created the costumes for Black Panther and also for Coming to America too. And the thing about her is that she researched in different different African tribes, the authentic traditional fabrics, and also the way that they wear them and the reason why they wear them. And she also hired African designers to create the outfits, right? And so I just thought, what a wonderful idea to use the beauty of Africa, to put it on the screen, because we have not had those kinds of images of Africa. Oftentimes we'll have like a beautiful movie that maybe white people have done, but it shows, the backdrop of Africa, and you just see like the elephants and the giraffes, running, the wildness, but you never see that you have people creating and being and doing things within Africa. In addition, Ruth Carter along with Paramount Pictures, gifted the Ragbaby Exchange leftover fabrics from Coming to America 2. So some of the fabrics that she used within that costume design for the movie, she gifted to the Ragbaby Exchange to create a workshop that is called Coming to America. And so when she did that, I took some of the fabrics and created a gift for her, and this was a doll. Now, the doll has glasses because Ruth Carter wears glasses, so that was part of the doll as well, but I didn't have the picture of that when I sent this to you.
And you also use, this is another piece of yours, and you work sometimes with incarcerated men and women and youth. And can you talk a little bit about that work and this
Right.
particular piece?
So this doll is not created by me. This was created by a participant, and this participant used the collage method. She used all glue, and she took strips of paper and fabric, and she put it together to create this doll. And I also, the reason why I started and discovered that glue was a really great idea is because I was offered an opportunity to work with women in the DC jail and juvenile offenders at the Juvenile Detention Center. And so I couldn't bring in any needles and any kinds of things that would be called contraband, anything that could go inside that could hurt someone else. And so glue was my choice to be able to create these dolls. And so that is what prompted me to realize that this can be a really creative piece of art because even though we do sew sometimes, and that's cool, but I think that sewing makes you want to create something perfect. Whereas when you're using glue, you're literally creating the therapy that you need through this, right? And so I really enjoyed working in the juvenile detention center. And the reason I did is because what I found was that so many girls were feeling, the reason why they were in there was their lack of self-esteem and their lack of feeling worthy. And they would go in the wrong direction because they wanted to impress someone, or they needed the kind of love they weren't getting. And one of the times that we did a workshop, it was over a weekend. It was lots of vendors. And so the girls had to do the workshop. A lot of them didn't want to. And one girl in particular was really upset. She didn't want to do a doll making workshop because, you know, let's face it, she was in juvenile detention. And it's like, I don't play with dolls and I don't want to make a doll, but she did. And she spoke at the end of this 3-day program. And what she said was that I didn't want to make a doll, but since I was forced to, as I began to really understand what I was doing, and I was putting love notes into this doll. And as I did that, I realized that no one ever put love into me. And at that moment, I said to myself, I have a baby girl, and I want to make sure I put love into her. And that was everything to me, because that made me realize that what I.
And speaking of, I'll stop sharing, but speaking of the healing, speaking of the healing aspect of dolls, there's the doll making, there's the actual doll itself that could provide some solace and comfort to a person, but there's also the actual workshop and the physical act of making.
Yes.
And then another component of your workshops that I understand is what happens next after the doll is completed. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of 3 aspects of healing that is embedded in the workshops and the work that you do?
Yes. So I wanted to make sure I created something that would help people to really realize that they were worthy. And so I wanted to have something that was, you know, really about releasing negative self-talk and replacing it with a positive thought on affirmation. And so we do that. We have one set of the workshop where we're releasing negative self-talk, we're replacing it with positive affirmation. Sometimes we are writing love letters to our younger selves. Sometimes we are releasing things that we have said or done to other people. And once we do that and we replace it with positive affirmations, we are actually stuffing that right into the doll, along with stuffing, because it does something for you to know that within this little vessel that you are creating of yourself, you have stuffed it, you have thought of what you want it to be and say and who you are, and you put it inside, and now this holds this beautiful energy. And then we go on, we talk about hair, we talk about body issues. If it has something to do with healing the body, we often stop where that is. Say someone had breast cancer. We will actually work on creating the wound area and maybe put flowers there if they want to. We still may cover it up with fabric for a dress or something, but we just stop and give honor to what we've done, what we've gone through, and we create that and we place flowers on it, and then we move on. We also think of forgiveness. We forgive ourselves, we forgive other people who said things to us that has hurt us, and we understand that now it's our turn to work on ourselves and to realize who we are. And then after we get through the forgiveness and the doll is created, we do the exchange. And there are 3 ways to exchange. The first way to exchange is you just took away all of these negative thoughts and you replaced it with positive affirmation. Now, you may still think those things sometimes, but now you'll never, ever forget that whenever you think negative, you can say, let me rephrase this. Let me replace it with this, right? So now you've exchanged negative for positive. Or you can exchange a doll by just giving it away to someone that maybe you hurt, someone that may be sick, just someone that you love. But what you're doing is you're exchanging love with them. So now you're giving this doll away and it's making them feel so wonderful. And the third way to exchange is you can have a group over here and a group over here. Say you have Baptist and Muslim. I've done this before. The Baptist Christians, they make their dolls. The Muslims, they make their dolls. And then we have a tea party and they exchange. Now, some people don't like to give their dolls away, but the people who do, they find that now they know that both groups are beautiful. Both groups have something to offer. Both groups are worthy to be on this earth and share in love. And that's what the Ragbaby Exchange is all about.
Can you talk? That's really beautiful. Can you talk a little bit more about the affirmations? Because you know, we know that there's some evidence in the past, like a few centuries ago, that as people were leaving West Africa, as you know, Africans were leaving West Africa to say go up to Europe and Portugal and what have you. One of the things that has been found are these little dolls or these human-like creatures, but they have notes in them. And these dolls were endowed with a certain sort of spiritual power to kind of guide, you know, that person on their trip and keep them safe. And so there's a real long tradition of the power of affirmations. Can you talk a little bit about affirmations and how you came to doing that with your doll making?
So affirmations are very powerful. And listen, when I began doing this, I had no idea that this had been done traditionally in African countries or anything, right? I actually learned it at church and I used it for myself to help with my self-esteem. I used it to tell myself that I could do it. I could be a nonprofit person. I could make a nonprofit and make it work. I had to use affirmations a lot for that. And so the power of affirmations is in the power of I am, right? So if you're using the word I am, it's very important not to use a negative term behind it. Now, always we're going to think something, you know, negative. Oh, I wish I wasn't fat, or why is this like that, or something like that. But you need to look at that and you need to reword it with the words I am with a positive statement, because it's just power in it. It's power to hear yourself, to speak out loud, like to vibrate from within your body and speak it out into the ethers that I am powerful. And that becomes a truth somehow. And so one time we did a workshop where we sent dolls to an AIDS hospital, an orphan hospital in Africa for girls who were recovering or living with AIDS. And they hadn't had any Black dolls. They got lots of dolls, but they weren't Black. So we took some kids and we had them make these dolls, and we had them do their own doll in their own image and put affirmations in the body for them. But we also had them write love notes to put in a little pocket so that when the children got the dolls, they could read it, right? And so we got a message when they got to Kenya. They did a tea party as well. And so when we got the message back, it took like a month and a half because it just took long for the travel of the dolls and for them to pick them up. The message we got back was all of these little girls holding up these dolls and saying, "Thank you, America, we love you." It's like they felt the love and they sent it back, you know? So I think that the power of affirmations, not saying them just like, "Oh, I think I'm pretty," but having the energy when you say it of excitement and happiness, because you have to be able to feel it. And that's why I think saying them out loud, it reverberates in your body and it helps you to believe.
Thank you. I want to, I know we want to have time for Q&A, but I have to, there's a nagging question that I have to ask you, and then we'll start the Q&A section. You said something about hair, and Black dolls and hair have been a conversation for the decades.
Yeah.
And I know you talked about self-esteem and the actual skin color of the doll fabric templates. But how does hair play into that? Because that's another part of self-esteem.
Hair is big. This is really big. Oh my goodness. One time I did a camp for girls and boys. And at the beginning of the day, we would have a conversation with both the girls and the boys about self-esteem and self-worth. And then the boys would go to another workshop and the girls would do the dolls. Well, one of the times, one of the boys was like, "You so bald-headed. You're so bald-headed. That, and I don't like that." And I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, she is. She's bald-headed." And I said, "Well, why do you think she's that way? And why is that not attractive to you?" And so we got into the conversation of little girls in Africa having no hair. And I explained to him that a lot of times it's because they are required to cut their hair to go to school. Like, there are things that people don't know that are happening, and they're just assuming their hair doesn't grow. Well, they have to cut their hair to go to school, right? And then I talked about some people have alopecia. Some people's hair doesn't grow. Some people's hair break off. Some people may just want to have short hair. And we had, this conversation that some girls add extensions because they want their hair to be longer because of what somebody like you are saying, that they're bald-headed, And so he really listened to me. And then when we created the dolls, I actually had weave hair so that they could create the dolls with hair like, afros or whatever kind of hair. And at the end of the camp, he came to me and he said, "I would never call a girl bald-headed again." So I think that this is one thing that we could spend more time on in the workshop, but oftentimes, people are so into making their dolls that we end up not having enough time to go into just that aspect alone. But it is big. Our hair, it means so much. Going to work, you had to straighten it at one time. Some schools wouldn't allow, locks or braids, or, it's just been very hard wearing our hair the way it grows out of our head, right? So it's a big thing. Yes.
We should turn it over to questions, because I know there's like a couple questions in the chat, and then there's some Q&A. So I will turn that over. I think Emma is going to do the Q&A.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. I just want to say thank you so much, Sherri and Yolanda, for this conversation. It's been so informative and just so heartwarming to hear about your work. So we'll start with a question with a short answer, which is, how do you spell the Abayomi dolls?
Oh, it's spelled Abayomi, Abayomi.
Amazing. And someone asked, there's so much to unpack when it comes to internalized colorism, especially among Black youth. Do you ever follow up with youth participants who struggle with their view of their own skin?
There have been times when I'm able to follow up, like when I work with the Juvenile Detention Center, and sometimes when I work with women's groups or young women with children, like teenagers with children. With those kinds of community groups, I can follow up, but I'm not able to follow up when it's done in schools, because I'm not in that kind of social services kind of operation. But what I find is that once you are explained about colorism and you understand what it may be doing to you, I find that people often every time it comes up, they recognize what it is. And so they either work on themselves or they just recognize what it is and move on. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And Christine Harper is asking if you've ever done these workshops with senior women, and how is their reaction to the workshop different from ones you've done with younger audiences and preteens?
So I have done it with seniors who were in a nursing home, but they did not have the same reaction as kids. They needed a lot more help. But I will tell you that the nursing home that I did this workshop in was at my grandmother's nursing home. And my niece and I were visiting my grandmother months after we had done the workshop. And I heard this woman telling a guy that she was going to let him use her doll to make him feel better. But that doll had her love inside of it, so he better give it back. And so I was like, oh my God, she got it. And I did most of the work for her, but she got it anyway, you know? So I just think that it's like, it's this little doll. It just holds so much power because it's you, and you get to create who you are, you know, that way.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah. Even if she didn't finish the doll herself, the love is still
Yeah.
her product.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And Christine's also asking about the workshops that you will be holding at the Phillips Collection. She asks if they are open to the public, which yes, they are, although we have to pay for the kits. They come with a full supply of kits. But I was wondering, Sherri, if you could talk a little bit more about the series of workshops that you are presenting.
Sure. So we're going to do the You're in a Doll Self-Esteem workshop, which would be for girls and women 8 to 108. And that would be the self-esteem basic workshop, some of the things we talked about today. And then we're going to do a workshop for healing. And that would focus on, like we said, parts of the body or what's going on in the world today, what you want to release, and how to, you know, think of self-care while creating this image of yourself. And then we have another workshop that is to honoring our mothers. I'm sorry, back to the healing. I would prefer that to be for all adults, but if young kids join, that would be fine. But the Mothers and Ancestors workshop will be geared to women only and 16 and above. And we will directly relate like sort of African traditions of honoring our ancestors and honoring our mothers within the workshop. And then I think there's a fourth one, but that would be the self-esteem workshop again.
All right. Excellent. And I shared the links for those workshops. They're up on the Phillips website, so you can click those and register below. All right. We have another question. As a Hampton grad myself, I recognize that some HBCUs, including Hampton, uphold some antiquated respectability politics that really affect the self-image of its students, particularly regarding hair. Would you ever take your workshop back to HU?
I would love to take, now I didn't finish at Hampton. That's one thing. I'm really drawn into everyone at Hampton because we all still know each other. I'm part of the alumni and everything. However, it would be an honor to go to any HBCU, but particularly Hampton, because it is sort of the place where I immediately lost all of my confidence. And I know so many people from there who are so successful and full of confidence themselves. However, I know there's lots of people there who are experiencing this. And yes, lots of colleges, and I'll say Hampton for one, I know that, you know, you can't wear your hair a certain way. Men have to make sure they have a haircut, or they can't, you know, wear their hair free. And so it is a little antiquated at times. However, I will say that HBCUs are all about trying to help you have a respect and status in the world, and they help you to no end to get through school. They are really a great institution to go to that can really get you what you need and pull you through. Good question though.
Absolutely. I know, I think we have a couple Hampton alum in the audience
Yeah,
today.
I saw a couple.
Good
Yeah.
to see. So if anyone has any final questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. If not, I might have a final question for Sherri, but we can also, perfect. All right. So Pierre Walcott wants to know if you can talk about the Ruth Carter connection a little bit more.
So I have speaking of Hampton, there is a guy, Rick Montgomery, who works with Ruth Carter, but he also went to Hampton and he knows my work. And he also used to be on my board when I first started. And it was him that said, wait, you're all in the same class, you need to meet. And so we met and, it was amazing. And he thought, you guys are doing great things. Maybe you can partner somehow. And what came out of that is the giving the gift of the fabrics towards the Ragbaby Exchange and the idea of creating a workshop centered around coming to America, and even some of raising a superhero, sort of like Black Panther, right? So what happened was that this should have been completed by now, but then COVID hit and the movie was held up to be released. And so we were going to do workshops leading up to the movie and have this big production, not so much Ruth Carter with me, but the whole idea of using what she's giving me. And it just got pushed back. Then the movie got sold. And so now we're able to go ahead and do the workshops anyway, even though we won't be able to do all the things centered around it that we had expected. So that's how I met Ruth Carter. Even though we were right in the same general vicinity and the same age and everything, we weren't connected while we were at Hampton, but we are now. Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. It'll be exciting to see the pieces that come out of that. We have a question for Yolanda, which is asking if, Yolanda, you can share some of your experience in doll making or research.
Yes, so I stumbled into researching Black dolls while I was working on a project where I was doing research about a community, sort of a community economic development organization that came about as a response to the Watts uprising. And a couple activists that were members of CORE and had been part of Freedom Summer had started this organization. They wanted to help provide jobs and other sort of economic support to the community after the uprising. And they were very, and it was actually very successful. This organization was called Operation Bootstrap. It was very successful. And they started to get notice from, local leaders and politicians. This was in 1965 when Ronald Reagan was actually the governor of California. And even he came down to check out what was going on at Operation Bootstrap. But they were very suspicious about taking any public money. And so one of the ways that they funded themselves was to branch off into these entrepreneur endeavors. And one of those endeavors, and their most successful endeavor, was the Shindana Toy Factory. And the Shindana Toy Factory produced Black dolls. And then it would later become the largest producer of Black toys in the country. And one of their dolls, their first doll they made, Baby Nancy, which just was inducted into the Toy Hall of Fame only a few months ago, actually, changed the toy industry. And the success of Shindana really had a huge impact on the toy industry. And so it's through that project that I got involved with researching Black dolls. And from there, I did other projects. Thank you for your question.
We have another question from Phillips' very own Gwen Young. She asks, you mentioned that you became a graphic designer. Do you feel that the creativity do you feel that the creativity you have helped you be successful with that, or did art classes steer you in that direction?
So I'm not, I think it's just natural creativity. I think that I dabbled in all kinds of art, and, what do they say? I can do all this stuff, but not the master of one. I just was like, just all kinds of art I can do, right? And that's why I probably teach crafts to seniors, because I can do all kinds of different art. And so I do remember, though, as a kid, really falling in love with Essence magazine, because it came out when we were young or something. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And so wanting to be at a magazine, I started off as a production person and ended up being able to do graphic design. So I think it just, this was a natural thing for me to be able to do it.
Absolutely. And then Tanya is asking if you can speak to how the pandemic has impacted your doll making activity. She says, I have found I've been drawn to dolls since the pandemic. And then also asking about what it is like to conduct workshops during the pandemic environment.
So at first, it was very hard to do the workshops because everything had to be canceled, because this is a hands-on experience. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what am I going to do. But the Abayomi Doll saved me. The Abayomi Doll was the one that, when we went to Cuba and Panama, that I learned about. And then I took a workshop with a Panamanian who did it. And I was like, Eureka, I can do this, and I can add some of my things that I do, some of my steps into creating this little doll. And then I sat there and I thought, I've got to find a way to do this. So I created a box, and it's not a subscription box, but it is a doll kit. And so I created that box during the pandemic. And so now we can do workshops over Zoom. You purchase the supplies, and then we have a Zoom meeting and we do it there. I will say that the Abayomi Doll is extremely successful on Zoom because it's easier and less time. And the other doll is not as successful to me on Zoom because I feel like it doesn't get as deep. We don't get into all of the areas that we need to get into while creating the doll.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, the virtual workshop landscape has been a challenge for us all, but I'm glad that you've been able to make that transition, and that you'll be able to make that transition with us at the Phillips Collection.
Yes.
Absolutely. And someone has asked, what are some ways for us to support the Ragbaby Exchange?
Ways to support the Ragbaby Exchange is through donations. Unfortunately, on my website that's being redesigned right now, you cannot push the donate button, but you can give to me through PayPal, and also we accept checks and stuff like that. Yeah.
Can you share the dates of the workshop?
So I know that the first one is April 10th. And I think the next one, they're every other weekend through April and May. So I'm going to look at my calendar real quick so that I can tell.
The next one is April 24th, and then the following workshop is on May 8th.
Okay.
Thank you. We hope that we will see some of you all there.
I hope so. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sherri and Yolanda. It's such a pleasure to listen to you this afternoon or this evening. And yeah, if anyone has one last question, but if not, I think we will all say goodnight.
Okay. Who is Brenda?
Thank you.
Brenda asked a question.
Oh, let's see. Brenda asked, did your modeling back. Brenda, if you wouldn't mind maybe elaborating on that question a tiny bit. Chat. Oh, did your modeling background have anything to do with your art? Thank you.
Oh, no, I think, well, that had to do with a lot of my self-esteem, you know, trying to get self-esteem or trying to believe that I was even worthy to model. So yeah, I think that's part of what made me create the dolls, you know, is learning to have self-esteem and to believe in myself. Thank you.
Are the workshops open to all people?
Yes, so Ragbaby Exchange does dolls for all colors, not just Black people or brown people. It's just that, you know, it's a time when it is really important for African Americans and Latinos to see themselves as worthy. So it's definitely not only for Black and brown people, so anyone can attend.
All right, and then one final question from the audience. Someone says that you have an incredible sense of style, which I agree with. And they ask, how do you go about selecting the materials or other items that go in your kits?
So a lot of materials are donated to me, and I buy a lot of materials. Like if I'm in a fabric store and I see something beautiful, I purchase it. I order stuff online, and then I try to have, you know, color coordinated fabrics. And I also buy lots of African prints. So I will add, you know, African prints for the Abayomi doll in particular. I like to add an African print and like a calico, because I feel like that's bringing the African American thing together. You know, you got the calicos from, you know, old quilts, and then you have the African prints, and together we are really creating an African American doll.
All right, amazing. Well, thank you again, Sherri and Yolanda. I think
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.